I've spent 15 years documenting cave incidents across Texas, and I can tell you that most stories about missing cavers follow predictable patterns. Equipment failure, getting lost in unmapped passages, falls, hypothermia. What happened at Deadwater Sink doesn't fit any pattern I know. The thing that bothers me most isn't what Dana Reyes said when they found her. It's what she didn't say. I've interviewed dozens of cave survivors, and they all have one thing in common. They want to tell you everything. Every detail. Every moment. It's like they're trying to prove to themselves it really happened. But Dana won't even admit she was there. Mark Colley had been guiding cave expeditions for 8 years when he first heard about Deadwater. Professional guides don't usually chase ghost stories, but Colley was different. He kept detailed journals of every cave he'd entered, mapping psychological responses alongside geological features. His notes from 2003 show an increasing obsession with what he called responsive environments, caves that seemed to react to human presence. The oil driller who told him about Deadwater was named Roy Hutchins. I tracked Roy down in 2007, 3 years after the incident. By then he was dying of lung cancer and didn't much care about keeping secrets. Roy told me he'd found a sink in 1987 while surveying for a drilling company. He'd rappelled down about 60 feet before his rope started vibrating. Not from wind, there was no wind down there. The rope was moving like something was plucking it from below. Roy climbed back up and never reported the find to his company. Said he'd had dreams about that place for 16 years. Always the same dream. He's at the bottom of the shaft, and something's calling his name from deeper in. When he tries to climb back up, the rope's been cut. I believe Roy. I've seen his company records. There's a gap in his survey log from that week, like he deliberately left something out. Colley assembled his team carefully. Dana Reyes wasn't just any graduate student. She'd spent 2 summers studying cave ecosystems in Mexico, including some pretty gnarly vertical systems. She knew her way around technical rope work and had a solid head for underground navigation. Lucas Meeks was the weak link, but he wasn't dead weight. Engineering student, rock climbing experience, good with electronics. More importantly, he had the nerve to go places that scared most people. They weren't thrill seekers. They were competent cavers who knew the risks and prepared accordingly. That's what makes this whole thing so goddamn unsettling. The morning of November 15th, 2003, was unseasonably warm. Dana's weather log shows clear skies, minimal wind, temperature around 75 degrees. Perfect caving conditions. They reached the sink around 9 a.m. after a 40-minute hike through scrub brush and limestone outcroppings. Here's something the official reports don't mention. There were other ropes already anchored at the site. Old ones, frayed and weathered, leading down into the shaft. Colley's journal mentions finding at least 3 separate anchor points, different rope types, various states of decay. Someone else had been going down there regularly, maybe for years. The shaft itself was unremarkable, a typical Texas limestone vertical drop, roughly 4 feet wide, descending into darkness. But Dana later described something that still gives me chills. She said the air coming up from below wasn't still. It pulsed, like breathing. They began their descent at 10:04 a.m. The GPS beacon in Colley's pack recorded their progress automatically, pinging their location every 20 minutes. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. The shaft bottomed out at 40 feet, opening into a horizontal passage that curved southwest. Standard cave formation for that region. Water-carved limestone with flowstone deposits and the usual array of breakdown. They moved in single file, Colley leading, Dana in the middle documenting formations, Lucas bringing up the rear with the survey equipment. At 10:47, they reached what Dana called the jar room, a natural chamber with a curved ceiling that created strange acoustic properties. Voices echoed back with a noticeable delay, but not uniformly. Some words returned immediately. Others seemed to hang in the air for several seconds before bouncing back distorted. Lucas first mentioned hearing voices at around 11:15. Not echoes of their own voices, but distinct sounds coming from deeper in the cave system. Colley's journal entry that night was typically methodical. Acoustic phenomena consistent with complex passage geometry. Meek's experiencing auditory hallucinations, likely due to sensory deprivation and anxiety. Recommends surface if symptoms persist, but they didn't surface. The passage beyond the jar room narrowed considerably, requiring hands and knees crawling for about 30 yards before opening into a second chamber. This is where the GPS data gets interesting. According to the beacon, they were now 138 feet underground, but they'd only descended 40 feet vertically. The math doesn't work unless the passage was sloping downward more steeply than anyone realized. Dana described the second chamber as wrong from the moment we entered. Not structurally wrong. The formation itself was textbook limestone solution cave, but the air was different, thicker. It carried smells that didn't belong: ammonia, ozone, something organic and sweet like overripe fruit. The walls were smooth in places they shouldn't have been smooth. Not water polished, but worn down as if something had been rubbing against them for a very long time. The scratches Dana mentioned weren't random gouges. They followed patterns. Deliberate marks like something had been keeping count. At 12:17 p.m., the GPS beacon transmitted its final signal. What happened next depends entirely on whether you believe Dana Reyes. And after 5 years of investigating this case, I'm still not sure I do. She claims they found a third passage leading down at a steep angle. Kali wanted to turn back, but the passage was too narrow to reverse direction safely. They had to continue forward to find a wider spot to turn around. Standard caving protocol. Nothing unusual about that decision. The passage curved and twisted for what felt like hours, though Dana admits her sense of time was completely shot by then. The walls grew warmer as they descended, and the air became humid despite the absence of any water source. Their helmet lights began flickering intermittently. Not battery failure, according to Dana, but something about the environment itself interfering with the electronics. Then Lucas started screaming. Not panic screaming. Dana was very specific about this. He was screaming words, but not words in any language she recognized. And he wasn't screaming toward them. He was screaming down into the darkness ahead, like he was responding to something calling to him. Kali tried to grab Lucas, but the passage was too narrow. Lucas kept crawling forward, still screaming, until the sound cut off abruptly. Dana said the silence that followed was absolute. No echo, no reverberation. Like the cave had swallowed the sound completely. That's when Kali started talking to something in the dark. Dana couldn't see what he was talking to from her position behind him, but she could hear his side of the conversation. He was being polite, apologetic even, explaining that they hadn't meant to intrude, that they would leave immediately if that was what was wanted. His voice got quieter and quieter until she couldn't make out the words, just the cadence of someone having a very reasonable discussion with an old friend. Then his light went out, not the bulb burning out or the battery dying, just instantly dark like something had covered it completely. But she could still hear him moving, crawling forward into whatever waited in the deeper darkness. Dana never saw either of them again. Her escape took 14 hours. She doesn't remember most of it. What she does remember comes in fragments. Crawling through passages that hadn't been there before, finding chambers she swears they never entered on the way down, and most disturbing of all, encountering other cavers who helped guide her toward the surface. These other cavers never spoke, never showed their faces, and their lights cast no shadows on the cave walls. When she tried to thank them, they would simply point toward the next passage she needed to take, then disappear back into the darkness. The bones she mentioned were small, delicate, human, but not fully developed. Children's bones, scattered in alcoves carved too precisely to be natural. She found 3 separate bone deposits during her 14-hour crawl to the surface, each one in an identical alcove, each one surrounded by the same careful scratch marks on the walls. When the ranch hand found Dana the next morning, she was hypothermic, dehydrated, and covered in limestone dust and blood. Her fingernails were torn down to the quick from clawing her way through tight passages. But here's what really bothers me. The blood wasn't just hers. The DNA analysis found traces of blood from 2 other individuals on Dana's clothing and gear. The lab couldn't match the samples to any database, but they could determine age ranges. One sample came from a male in his 30s, the other from a juvenile, roughly 8 to 10 years old. Search and rescue teams spent 6 days mapping every accessible passage in Deadwater Sink. They used ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, acoustic sensors, everything. Total surveyed depth, 82 feet. No chambers beyond the second room Dana described. No passages leading to lower levels. No bones. But they did find something the official reports don't mention. Tool marks on the walls of the deepest accessible chamber. Fresh scratches in the limestone. Too regular to be natural, too precise to be accidental. Someone or something had been modifying the cave structure. Recently, the cave was sealed in March 2004, but not because of safety concerns. The county commissioner received 17 separate reports of sounds coming from the sealed entrance after sunset. Voices, scratching noises, and according to one sheriff's deputy, the sound of children laughing deep underground. I've talked to that deputy. He's not the type to imagine things. Career law enforcement, 30 years on the job, seen everything there is to see in rural Texas. He told me those voices were definitely children, but children who had been underground too long. Changed children. Children who had forgotten what surface sunlight felt like. Dana Reyes completed her graduate degree, but never entered another cave. She moved to Fairbanks, Alaska, where she works as a lab technician for the state fish and game department. I contacted her twice. The first time, she hung up immediately. The second time, she stayed on the line long enough to say 5 words that I still think about every day. They're still down there waiting. The thing is, I don't think she was talking about Collie and Meeks.